All right, welcome back. Our second required foundational document, Federalist number 10. Let's get to it. All right, so again, consider the context with which the AP Gov exam wants us to look at this. It's that same one as Brutus, the balance between governmental power and individual rights. So that's what we're going to consider in this episode. All right, so again, I have clips of some passages from Federalist number 10, as well as brief summaries of these passages. All right, so right in the beginning, he states his purpose. He wants to talk about the advantages of a union, one of which is to control the violence of faction. So this raises a question: what form of government can best limit the negative effects of factions? So factions, we're talking about groups of people. I think actually the next slide might define it, so hang on. Yeah, there we go. Because then in the second paragraph, Madison defines what he means when he says faction. So this is nice of him. He says, by faction, I understand a number of citizens who are united by some common impulse or passion or interest, adverse to the rights of other citizens. So he's viewing this as, he's defining a negative faction, really. A faction can be good or bad. It doesn't have to always be adverse to the rights, but obviously he's talking about how it can be a problem. So it's problematic when that group goes contrary to the rights of others. So we're going to define faction as a group of citizens with a common political purpose. Political parties, interest groups, labor unions, those are all examples of factions. Again, they can be good or bad. We're going to talk about how to control the potentially bad effects of factions. All right, so here he says, this is Madison again, he says there's two ways that we can cure the mischief or the problems of factions. One, remove the causes, the other, control its effects. But when he talks about removing the causes of factions, so the causes of us grouping off, he says we could either destroy the liberty essential to its existence, meaning we could just outlaw that and we could say you legally are not allowed to form groups. You cannot have a political party, you can't have an interest group, you can't have a union, but that would be really bad. And I'm not going to show you that paragraph, but he goes on to talk about how that's worse than the problem of factions if we actually took that liberty away. So he says that's not even a choice. Or we could give every citizen the same opinion. That's not realistic either. So he essentially says you cannot remove the causes of faction. That's what he's getting at with these couple of sentences here. So, again, just one more sentence about why you can't get rid of this. He says the latent or the hidden behind the scenes causes of faction are thus sewn into the nature of man. That means that they are natural. So he says the causes cannot be removed, though the only relief is to be sought in the means of controlling its effects. So it's natural that we'll form factions. We'll do so naturally. We'll group with people who are similar to us, people who have similar opinions, same job, same education, people who live near us geographically. We will naturally form groups, and that's okay. But that means we can't get rid of factions, so we're going to have to control the negative effects instead of actually preventing them. All right, so when can people forming factions be a negative thing? Well, he talks about how you can have majority factions and minority factions. Minority faction is a group of people that's smaller than half the population, so they don't have power politically to do anything. So they are rendered unable to hurt others simply by their lack of numbers. However, the majority would potentially in a democracy be able to oppress minorities. So he says here, I'm just going to read what I have highlighted because I highlighted exactly the key things. The majority must be rendered unable to concert, meaning come together, concert, and carry into effect schemes of oppression. So in other words, there must be something within our form of government that prevents the majority from oppressing minorities. And we're going to see what he describes and what he suggests will do that. So he starts with direct democracy. So will direct democracy, he calls it pure democracy, same thing, be able to do this? And he says no, because it'll be a society consisting of a small number of citizens, and he says it can admit of no cure for the mischiefs of faction. So he's arguing that a direct democracy cannot control factions. Why not? He says A common passion or interest will be felt by a majority. So since you have a small group of people close together, they're likely that most of them are going to be pretty similar to each other, so they're going to be able to easily form a majority. And once they have that majority, because remember, direct democracy, people are directly voting on policies, there's nothing to check the inducements to sacrifice the weaker party, meaning minority, or an obnoxious individual. So what he's saying here is if we vote, allow the people to vote directly on things, the majority is going to win, and there's no check, there's nothing to stop them from oppressing minorities if they so desire. So now this is where he responds to Brutus. Remember, Brutus had charged that republics have only historically worked in small areas. Small republics have worked. Large republics never have. And Madison admits that, but he says the fact that small republics, he says, actually don't work very well. Because the smaller the society, the fewer the distinct parties and interests. So you'll have fewer separate groups, separate or smaller number of factions. So when you have fewer factions, the more frequently you'll have a majority within a single faction. And then it'll be easy for them to come together and to oppress minorities and people that they don't like. If you pick up where the word extend the sphere means make it larger. And you take in a greater variety of parties and interests. Now there will be more factions. And when you have more factions, it becomes less probable that a majority will have a common motive or interest to invade the rights of other citizens. So what he's saying here is that when you make the republic large enough that it actually will have so many factions that no one faction will be able to oppress the minority. All right, so taken in conjunction with that previous paragraph, he's saying that a large republic is going to be the best solution. So he says there's a Republican remedy for the disease most incident to Republican government. That disease he's been talking about, factions. And so the Republican, we should have a Republican form of government. In the last paragraph, he said why the large republic, because you'll have more factions. So ironically, by having more factions, you will actually weaken each of them, so none of them will form a majority, and none of them will be able then to oppress minorities, is his argument. So a large republic is the best way to control factions and prevent majorities from oppressing minorities. This has been a La Money production. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button.